Hello. This is the review session for the first midterm. We are going to be going over what you need to know for the exam that you'll be taking later this week. And I have the exam here. This is the same one that you're going to take. And I hope you didn't blow up the screen because that's all the questions. So we're going to make sure that we go over every question. I'm not going to tell you exactly what the questions are, but we're going to go over everything so that you'll know what you need to do for an answer. The test is going to be made available on Canvas. And I want you to email your response to me. So the test consists of 8 questions, and you're going to be asked to answer 6 of those questions. Your answers should be several sentences in length, kind of like what you're putting up on the weekly discussions. And then I will grade all 6 of those questions. I will drop out the one that you did the most poorly on, and then the other 5 questions is what's going to be determining your grade. So this is worth a lot more than your weekly discussions. Those are worth 10 points each. Most of you are getting 100% on those because you're completing the assignment, you're thoughtfully commenting on what somebody else had to say, and you're answering the question and engaging the material, and that's what's being evaluated there. These will be graded kind of more strictly. You need to be able to both evidence that you have thought about the question and get the question more or less correct. I mean, this is philosophy and it's not mathematics, so it's not as precise, but there are correct answers to these or specific things that I'm looking for. And it will be worth a lot more than your discussion grades. Those are worth 10 points each. This is going to be worth 100 points. And so the whole idea is that over the course of the semester, we'll have enough of those weekly discussion grades that it'll be worth the equivalent of an exam altogether. This week, there's not going to be any kind of discussion grade because this week we are having the review video and then we are having the exam later in the week. So the exam is not going to be made available at the same time as the review video, but it will be coming. And the idea is that you'll be completing that exam Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, or something like that, and then submitting that to me. And then next week, we will start our transition from the ancient period, where we have been so far, to the modern period. And we have the 2 Thomases to kind of bridge that gap. We've got Thomas Aquinas, who was a really renowned medieval philosophical figure. And then we've got Thomas Hobbes, who was an early modernist. But that's next week. We'll worry about that then. So for today, we want to review. So we will recall that the first thing that we read for the class is the Euthyphro by Plato, and that dealt with the concept of piety. Now, piety is a related concept to ethics, but it's not the same, and it is much more closely related to religion. And really what piety is concerned with religious devotion. How are we able to do things that are acts that are pious? And as you'll recall, Socrates was engaged with the young man Euthyphro, who was a very proud young man, and he thought the pious action was to prosecute his father for murder. And he went round and round with Socrates for a long time, for most of the dialogue. And then as the dialogue ends, we don't really get any kind of resolution or answer to the question of what is piety. But it doesn't mean that we haven't expanded our understanding. One of the things that Socrates says to Euthyphro, and that Euthyphro agrees with, is that what is pious should always and everywhere be like the pious, and what is impious should always and everywhere be like the impious. And this kind of changes the discussion. This is why we read this text, right? Is because Socrates shifts the ground here. Before philosophy really got started in ancient Greece, what is pious would be a question that would be answered by a priest or some religious mystic. And this person would have special insight into what was pleasing to this god, and they would tell you. And And Socrates says that that is insufficient, that if we are going to talk about concepts of piety, and this would apply not just to piety, but concepts of justice, concepts of beauty, concepts of character, concepts of right and wrong, right? He says that these things should be always and everywhere the same, so that what's pious should always be pious, and what's impious should always be impious. And the reason this is important is because that puts it into the realm of rational analysis. So no longer is the question of piety, the special purview of the initiated or the mystic or the religious traditionalist, the one who has gone to school, the one who serves at the temple. But instead, these are now questions that each one of us should be able to grapple with because they are subject to reason. And so to suggest that there is a thing that's piety and that that thing doesn't change, what that means is that we can now examine the question of piety under the lens of reason. That what is or is not pious can be argued, it can be transmitted, it can be deduced, it can be inferred because the ground has shifted. And this is what's important about this distinction. This is what's important about what Socrates is doing. Socrates says that there is a thing that's piety, and that this thing that's piety is an unchanging thing, and that it's subject to rational examination. And that's why we start this course with that text, because it shows us how it is that the ground shifts. Okay, so we're going to go on to Aristotle. One of the things that we learn in Aristotle is that the word ethics has the same root as the word for habits or customs. And the Greek word is ethike. And we can see this in other English words, right? So one of the things that's interesting about English is that we have this word ethics, and then we have this word ethnicity or ethnic, and they sound the same, but they seem to us to mean very different things, right? Ethics is the distinction between right and wrong, but ethnicity are the habits and culture of a people. It's what makes up a culture. And they seem very different to us until we realize that the common root is habit or custom. So we can see how doing an ethnology of a group of people is an investigation of their habits and customs. And we can also see how, especially when we read Aristotle, how the ethical person is the one who has acquired the habits of virtue. But it might not be easy to see how these two things are related if we don't know that. And it's very important to understand that when we read Aristotle and other virtue ethicists, that we really are talking about the habits of virtue. And this is why Aristotle went on at length to discuss things like the education of children, and the formation in them of the habits that will make them good people. In Aristotle, really one of the goals of the human person is to acquire the habits of desiring the thing that's good for them, right? And this is what's going to lead us to that eudaimonia. And so it's good to remember when we are studying ethics that there is always this connection to habits, and that virtues are like habits formed in people to help them to do good and to do the right thing in the right circumstance. We can see this in even our common expressions when we talk about the concept of developing character, right? People understand that you have to work to develop good character. And what that means is that you have acquired these habits of virtue. So we want to remember this connection. Okay. Sorry, I am addressing these questions not in the order they appear on the sheet, but kind of in the order that they appeared when we talked about them in class. One of the things that we talked about in class is the story of Goldilocks and the three bears, right? Where we had this little girl who went into the forest and went into the house of the three bears when they weren't there, and she tasted the porridge, and she found that this bowl of porridge was too hot, and this other bowl of porridge was too cold, but the middle-sized bowl of porridge was just right, and then she ate it all up. And we talked about how this familiar story that we have of Goldilocks, which is a story about, it's not a story about finding the golden mean, right? Because Goldilocks really doesn't. I mean, she's trespassing in this home that belongs to these creatures that could, really do her some serious damage. And then depending upon what version of the story you read, she ends up either running away or getting eaten by the bears. And so that's not really what the story is about. But the concept of the golden mean is illustrated so well in the story that, that we're going to kind of use it here to talk about it. That it gives this concept, and children respond really well. And if you are ever a parent, or if you have a niece or a nephew, or the young child of a friend that you ever read to, and you read this story, you'll find that children like the repetitive character of this story. This one was too hot, that one was too cold, but the middle one was just right. This chair was too hard, this chair was too soft, but the middle chair was just right. This bed was too hard, this bed was too soft, but the middle bed was just right. And they like this. They like the repetitive quality, and they like this contrasting of the excess and the defect and finding the golden mean. And Aristotle tells us, of course, that virtues operate in this way, that you have some quality or characteristic, and the golden mean is going to be the virtue. But it's going to have a defect on one side and an excess on the other. And we talked a lot about how temperance is this way. Temperance is moderation in bodily pleasures, right? And that we can see the defect, well, we can see the excess probably more easily. We can see the excess, the person who's immoderate in bodily pleasures, maybe the gluttonous person who eats to an excess and has poor health as an outcome, or the drunkard who eventually contracts alcoholism, or loses the good things in life because they're never sober enough to enjoy them, habitually late to work because they're hungover or whatever. Don't do your homework for your college courses because you are too involved in the bodily pleasures, and we see that excess side of it. Sometimes we don't see the defect side as much, but the defect side is still there, right? There is a defect with the approach to bodily pleasures, and sometimes we can see this defect in health food fanatics, right? We've probably all known some of these people, the people who are always chasing the latest health food fad, maybe the people who change with the seasons, depending upon what the current medical research says, and really don't ever enjoy their food. They don't ever eat delicious food. It's almost like eating for them. The foods that they eat might almost be a penance, that there's almost this idea that you should be ashamed to enjoy anything. And then, of course, there are a lot of people who eschew alcohol altogether, And see, I'm drinking a health drink right now, the flavored bubbly water. There are a lot of people who eschew alcohol altogether, and there's a variety of reasons that they do that. And the people who eschew alcohol altogether, I don't think Aristotle would say that they have any kind of defect in character, but the ones who are so stringent in their avoidance of alcohol that they don't even believe it's possible for any person to have any sort of moderate enjoyment of an alcoholic beverage. That might be somebody who's on the excess of defect with temperance, right? So we have some of these types that we know. And of course, the virtue is the mean that's in the middle. It's the golden mean. And so we can go through the virtues like this, and just like Goldilocks, we can, we kind of test the porridge. This porridge is too hot. That porridge is too cold. This one is just right. We can do that with the virtues. So one of the virtues that Aristotle talks about is the virtue of bravery, and he talks about it in exactly these terms, right? The brave person is the one who risks his life for the right reasons and in the right ways and in the right times, right? That is the brave person. That's the mean. And the excess or the vice of defect, we can see easily. The defective person is the coward, the one who runs away, the one who won't stand up for himself, or the one who won't stand up for his friends or his loved ones or his family. That person would be a coward, and that would be a vice of defect. Whereas on the other side, there is the vice of excess, and this is kind of like a brashness. And we encounter these kinds of people as well, the ones that find fault that isn't there, the ones who are at a party and maybe they try to pick fights with people, the ones who get so puffed up with pride that they are ready to fight with somebody instead of listen. This is the excess, the vice of excess with regard to bravery. And all of the virtues work this way. The one that we had in our discussion was the virtue of truthfulness, right? And it turns out that where Aristotle talks about truthfulness in the Nicomachean Ethics, it's later on. It's not part of what we read, but I wanted to see how you dealt with it, and most of you dealt with it very, very well. He had the virtue of truthfulness was the golden mean, and then on the vice of excess, he had the braggart, right? The one who tells more than the truth about himself in order to be puffed up, right? And the one who is the defect is the one who won't even take credit for the good things that they do, right? So this would be the person, and I'm sure some of you have been in the situation, maybe in school at some point you had a group project and you did all of the work and your classmates took all of the credit and you weren't truthful about it, that you had a vice of defect in regard to the truth, that you should have at least been forthright and said, most of this is my work, or all of this is my work, at some point in the process. See, so it works the same way. The next thing that we want to talk about is friendship. Aristotle did talk about friendship, and his discussion of friendship is not in what we read, but it was covered in the lectures. Aristotle has 3 types of friendship, and he's one of the first philosophers to talk about friendship. And college students are at an age where I think that they really can see the importance of friendship with regard to eudaimonia, the living the blessed life, or living a life in blessed happiness. That we see that friends play a role in your living a good human life, that you're living a life to its potential. And so he breaks it down into 3 categories of friendship. And all 3 of these are good, right? All 3 of these help you live better. But some good things are better than other good things. And Aristotle classifies friendships into a hierarchy. So all friendship is good, but then there are levels of friendship that are better according to where they fall in this hierarchy. And so we're going to look at the bottom first, and these are friends of utility. Now, all of us have friends of utility, and if you are, talking to the people in the career center, right, or the placement office, they used to call them placement offices, the people who help you turn your college degree into a job, they will talk about the virtue of utility friendships, but they don't talk about it in terms of utility friendships. That's the Aristotelian language. They talk about networking. And networking is a good thing. It can help you to find the place where you can utilize your skills in the world to your advantage and to the mutual advantage of your neighbors. Right, that's what we do in the American economy. We develop our skills, and then we go out into the workplace and we use our skills to the mutual advantage of ourselves and our neighbors, and we network. That is, we make recourse to utility friendships in order to be able to do that. Other places that we talk about utility friendships is, you might have those friends that you call when it's time to move because maybe they have strong backs and strong arms, and you have an exchange of utility with them. Maybe they you need to use their strong arms and strong backs, and in exchange you provide refreshments and beverages, maybe some pizza and some sodas or some beers, and you do some work together, and then you have some recreation together, and those can be suitable and good friendships. Sometimes we have a friend we call when our car is broken, and we have a quality exchange with that person. Somebody, it's always important to have a friend who knows something about mechanics and who can help you in a situation where you are not sure what to do. We don't take advantage of those people. We understand that, like we have utility friends, we also likewise are the utility friend of some other people. And so this is the bottom level of friendship, and we can see how it's a good thing and operates well in our world and increases our blessed happiness, our eudaimonia. The second level of friendship, a little bit higher, is pleasure friendship. Right? These are people whose company we seek out because we find pleasure in similar activities. This is probably the most common type of friendship amongst young people, especially people in college. You are meeting new people, and when you meet new people, the first thing you do is you find out what kinds of things they enjoy. Do they participate in any sporting activity? Do they like to go and do outdoors activities like hiking and camping and fishing? Do they play baseball or softball or broomball or ice hockey or football? Do they like to go for walks or exercise? What kind of food do they like? What kind of music do they listen to? What kind of movies do they think are good? What sort of video games do they enjoy? All of these kinds of questions that you are interested in when you meet a new person, right? These are all geared towards establishing pleasure friendships. And these are good. These kinds of friendships help you to recreate. These are the friends that, you go snowshoeing with, or, maybe play basketball with. These are the friends that you might go to parties with. These are the friends that you like to hang out with and watch movies together with or play video games with. These are really good friends. And that's the second level, the pleasure friendship. The third level of friendship is the virtue friend, and that's at the top here. And the virtue friend, there's a lot of things going on. One of the main things that happen, and this is a difficult thing. The virtue friendship has to be a friendship of equality. And in America, because of our kind of democratic traditions, we kind of tend to think of all things as a relationship of equality. But then when we really examine our lives, we can see that just isn't true. We don't treat everybody equally, and we can't, because we're human beings, right? We're obviously going to treat our mothers better, right, than somebody that we've just met. Our mother has a higher claim on us. And there are friends that you will treat more as equals than anybody else. And so this is the first thing with the virtue friendship, is that there's a relationship there of equality. And this was also important for Aristotle because he lived in a highly stratified society. And that relationship of equality is important. So the next thing about these virtue friends is that they really help you to work on your virtues. They encourage you to be better people. And it's really difficult to find, like in our literature, examples of this kind of virtue friendship. And I like the Lord of the Rings books and movies, and one of the first places that people want to go when they talk about the virtue friendship, the highest form of friendship, is they want to go to Frodo and Sam. And they have a good solid friendship, but the equality is not there. Frodo is higher up in the hierarchy than Sam is. Sam is Frodo's servant. And as Americans, that's hard to hear, because clearly they love each other a great deal, but there's not a relationship of equality there. And the better relationship of equality that we might see in the Lord of the Rings trilogy as a virtue friendship could be between Merry and Pippin. And this is a harder one, because especially in the films, Merry and Pippin were kind of described as pleasure friends. They were friends who enjoyed doing the same things. But in the books, you can see, especially later on as you get into them, they really were these equals who helped one another to be better people. And part of that was enjoying this spirit of equality between them. Also, if you read in the books, some of the relationships that the different elf lords had to one another might be described as virtue friendships, but that doesn't get into it as much. I think other things from popular culture where we have some good virtue friendships might be like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, or Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock. Even though there was a hierarchical imbalance there, I think it's very clear by some of the later movies that really wasn't true to who they really were. Anyway, that's the virtue friendship. It's at the highest level, and it's the one that does the most to help us achieve eudaimonia. But friendship is important also for other reasons, because remember, we had this discussion about politics being the highest art, that Aristotle believes that fundamentally human beings are social creatures, that we're not living the fullest and most human life if it is solitary, right? The most fulfilling human life, the human being who has done the most to live their lives in accordance with what a human being is for, right? The one that's achieved the most eudaimonia, will necessarily have to have one or several of these virtue friendships, because this kind of friendship is part of being human at the highest level, right? So this whole discussion of friendship that he has in the Nicomachean Ethics, it happens later in the book, in the part that we didn't read, is really connected back to that first chapter where he talks about the good of the politician, or the good of politics, as being the highest good for human beings, because we're the type of creature who is social. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears. I think I've covered the questions on Aristotle. I do want to talk a little bit about Epicurus. Now, one of the things about Epicureanism is that it was hugely unpopular with the Christians who came after him. Not immediately after, but like hundreds of years after, right? So we know that we know that Epicureanism was very popular from about somewhere in the 3rd century BC until really the Christianization of the Roman Empire, which happened in the 4th century AD. So we have like a period of 700 years here. And then after that, Epicureanism was very unpopular with the Christian civilization. Stoicism, not so much. It was a better fit, but the Christians reacted very negatively to this, what they thought was a hedonism in Epicurus, where he said, a person should live in the manner that maximizes their pleasures and minimizes their pains. Maximizes pleasures and minimizes pain. This is the fundamental premise of Epicureanism. And Christianity, especially ancient Christianity, and this is less true with a lot of more modern Christianities. Christianity had this very strong ascetic streak. So asceticism is where you kind of deny bodily pleasures in order to achieve some sort of spiritual reward, right? And Christian asceticism was all about denying the bodily pleasures so that you could get control of the passions, the control of the bodily passions, those things that tempted you to sin. You get control over those. And then the idea is that once you have better control over those, then you can achieve a greater union with Christ. And that union with Christ is going to bring you something like eudaimonia, right? So eudaimonia is a pagan version, right? The Christian version of that would be union with Christ, and it might be described as some sort of a theophany or a divinization or something like that, becoming like God, so that's the highest level of existence for the human being. So what the Christians did is that they attacked the Epicureans and called them hedonists, those people who are just interested in bodily pleasures and bodily pleasures alone. Those are the hedonists. And so Epicurus did not enjoy a very good reputation. And really that might not be a very fair characterization. And this comes out especially if we look at the life of Epicurus himself. Really, this was a life of moderation. It ended up being a life of detachment. So in a lot of ways, it was a life of detachment somewhat similar to what the Stoics advocated, except for the Stoics advocated a letting go of things that you can't control, whereas the Epicureans advocated a letting go of things that could bring you pain. Right? So there are some important distinctions, but a lot of times the result ends up the same, that Epicurus himself ended up leading a quiet, peaceable life in the countryside. He ended up dying, we think, of kidney stones, which is a very, very painful death, but spent his last days with his friends and was reportedly in very good humor because the pains of the body, as severe as they were not sufficient to overwhelm the pleasures that he had from his rational discourse with his friends. So this characterization of the Epicureans as hedonists, people who are solely interested in striving for pleasure at all costs, is probably not accurate, nor is it fair. Because if we look at Epicureanism, what we find is that it suggests moderation because it's far more interested in avoiding pain than it is in pursuing pleasure. And the avoidance of pain really means that we have to be detached in many ways from worldly things. And the detachment from worldly things, not only does it fit with Stoicism relatively well, it also fits with certain varieties of Christian asceticism. So that's one thing that we need to know about Epicureanism. Epicurus said that the one who lives the pleasant life is wise, well, and just. This is a really important concept, because he's wise, well, and just is referring to kind of three areas of life that you need to take care of, that you need to be careful to avoid pains in. So if you're a wise person, or if you're living a wise life, that means that you're taking care of the mind. That means you're learning new things on a regular basis. That means that you're reading texts. That means you're keeping up on the current events. That means that you're trying to expand the amount of knowledge that the human race has. That's the wise person. If you are living well, that means that you are taking care of the body in as far as it is in your power. You're not eating or drinking to excess. You're not doing things that intentionally damage the body. You're trying to get your daily exercise. You're not abusing you're not on drugs or anything. You are trying to live well. You're trying to respect your body. And to live justly means that you're taking seriously that we don't live on our own, right? We live in communities. And what Epicurus is talking about by living justly is living well with our neighbors. So we're not doing things to offend them. We're treating them on a fair basis, and we are trying to do them some good. So Epicurus explains the pleasant life as the one who's wise, well, and just. He's taking care of his mind, he's taking care of his body, and he's taking care of his community. And that's really far from hedonism. The hedonist is trying just to take care of himself, whereas Epicurus's idea of the one who's living the pleasant life is pleasant because he's taking care of mind, body, and neighbor, and those three things. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Stoicism. The test, I think, has just one question on Stoicism. So we read the Enchiridion, and Epictetus talks in there about all of the things that you can control and the things that you can't control, and that we should worry about those things that we can control and try to not worry or not be concerned about the things that we cannot control. And he had that, I think this was beautifully illustrated in what he said about the coffee cup or the ceramic cup, that if you have a favorite ceramic cup, right, and it breaks, think not about how much you love this cup, but about how much you love ceramic cups in general, and the loss of this particular cup will not disturb you. And likewise, if you kiss your wife or your child, think about how much you like kissing other human beings and not these particular human beings. And that way, if they die, you will not be disturbed. This quotation is probably, it's simultaneously the most illustrative and perhaps the most difficult quotation in Stoicism. It's really, it's a hard one, right? I think we might get over the loss of coffee cups. I mean, I've had this happen to me. You know, anybody who really is over the age of 40, I think, has probably had a favorite cup, something that is, you know, full of memories, and then they've had it break. Once you have children, you kind of learn this lesson that things will break. But it is a lot harder to apply this to the people in our lives whom we love. But Stoicism tells us not that life will be easy, but that we will do well in it if we are detached. And so this concept of detachment is really, really big in Stoicism. So remember that we had talked about Admiral James Stockdale, who was in a North Vietnamese prison camp for a long time. And he credits Epictetus and his study of Epictetus for getting him through that experience. And his reliance on the Stoic philosophy of Epictetus was so substantial that after he was released, and then his body was broken for his whole life, he went to teach at West Point. Was it West Point or Annapolis? I can't remember now. One of the military academies, and he basically he rewrote the curriculum on how on the training that military officers now get on how to withstand torture. He wrote the book on how to withstand being tortured because of the lessons that he learned from Epictetus. And all philosophers, of course, strive to be rational, and they strive to be objective. But one of the things that I think we can say about Epictetus is that having started his life as a slave in Rome probably had something to do with the fact that he came up with what he came up with, right? The fact that when he began his life, and it's true that he was freed later in life, but that when he began his life, he was not his own. And I think this is really hard for us as Americans, because as Americans, that's kind of our first principle, is that you are your own. We no longer have slavery in America. But even that's not true for some people. Slavery is illegal in America, but we do have people in America who are enslaved. We have people who are enslaved to work in like factories. We have a lot of people who are enslaved in America who are forced into prostitution and that sort of sexual slavery that goes along with human trafficking. And then it's a small world, and so even slavery outside of America affects us. I remember that several years ago, there was a scandal because the shrimp that they were selling at Walmart was produced by companies who actually had enslaved people, and they had enslaved people working on these shrimp boats in the South China Sea. And the shrimp that they were selling at Walmart was the product actually of slave labor. And thanks to the good work of some activists, Walmart changed that. They are the kind of company who sells enough shrimp and has enough global reach that they were able to actually reform the whole shrimping industry in Southeast Asia, and they made things better. But Epictetus was a slave, and so even though he was a slave that was treated well, he knew that he was in some way not his own. And so this has a profound effect then on his philosophy, that he knew that even though he didn't own himself, he didn't own his body, right? And we notice that when we read the Enchiridion, the body is on the list of the things that we don't have control over. That he knew that even though he didn't have control over his body, that there were things that were his own. His attitude, his thoughts, those things that were internal to him. And so to live well as a slave, he would have had to have developed some sort of philosophy that was like the one that he did. And I think that we can see this. So even if we look at the American experience and the horrors of chattel slavery in the United States prior to the Civil War and the history of racial discrimination after that, I think that we can still find examples there of people who transcended their circumstances in a stoic way. And even though they were the victims of injustice, were able to live the good life as someone like Admiral Stockdale in North Vietnam or Epictetus as a slave would have understood it. And so this is the thing. This is the brilliance of the Stoic philosophy, is that it is the thing that can give us a sense of dignity, really, in the worst circumstances that we can imagine. Okay, so I'm going to take a look at my exam here and make sure that we covered everything. Stoic philosophy. Friendship, bravery. So this concludes our review then. I know it's a little bit shorter than some of the other lectures, but in your review, you can also go back and revisit all of those things. All of those announcements with the links to the videos and everything are still up there. The exam will be up later this week. And this is a new video that I am recording on February 11th. So the dates that I'm talking about in this video are accurate. So February 11th, 2023. So you'll be watching this video early in the week. My plan right now is to get it up on Monday, like probably midday sometime, so that you'll watch this Monday evening or Tuesday or Wednesday. And then the idea is to have the exam available on Thursday and to have that exam then due probably by the following Monday. So you have a few days to work on it. Good luck.